Well, hello there, Gracious Gang. It is time for another episode of the Gracious Guest Show, and I'm your host, Mike Creevy. And if you've never tuned into this program before, let me just lay it out for you a little bit. What this show is about is wonder and marvel. So basically, you know how they say, like, you put a little bit of salt on a food, and it tends to draw the flavor out of it, rather than imposing something on it. That's if it's done right, of course. Well, I feel like this show is meant to be salt for life, and why do I say that? Well, because I'll take something like a movie, or a book, or a particular life experience, or a sort of a question that I think a lot of us might run into or consider, but not necessarily overtly ponder it, although we certainly do sometimes. And I try to, through this show, just sprinkle a little bit of salt on that thing. Try to draw out the deeper meaning and, a deeper and richer experience of that, and just kind of give us reason to press pause for a little bit during our busy days and think about the stuff that really matters. There's so much that we run into each day that tends to eat up our time. And you get to the end of the day and you wonder where the day went, and was it even worth it? Was it productive? And that question, I think, alone, was it productive? The fact that becomes our oftentimes most important question, I think, is problematic as well. Because who says everything has to be productive? Who says everything has to be, quote, useful? So if you want to go back and listen to my episode, I forget the number off the top of my head, but there's an episode I did on leisure that you might want to go listen to that takes that up a little bit more in detail. But for today, I want to dig into something that came to mind when I was remembering, of all things, this ridiculous old Saturday Night Live skit called George. It's called George Will's Sports Machine. And if you know any of George Will, a commentator and writer and sort of political wonk and policy guy, and back in I guess it was the late 80s, because it was the cast with Dana Carvey, and there was a skit where I want to say it was Corbin Burnson, who, if you guys like Psych, which is one of my favorite shows of all time, he later on in life, like 10 or 15 years after this skit I'm talking about, he played Sean's dad on Psych. But he's on there playing a professional baseball player, and I want to say, I can't remember who all else was on there, but it was a game show, and Dana Carvey was he was the host, playing George F. Will as the host of George Will's Sports Machine, and it was Corbin Burnson and John Lovitz and somebody else, maybe Dennis Miller, maybe, I can't remember if it was him or not, but anyways, they were like contestants, and they're behind their podiums, like on Jeopardy, kind of. And the game is basically consisting of George Will asking sports questions, and they're really ripping on, like, his intellectual prowess, clearly equaling, that he has no sports or athletic ability whatsoever. Like, they're really playing that sort of joke. So every question he asks is incredibly erudite and lucid and complex, and the guys are like, isn't this a sports show? So one of them, he describes a famous catch, that the center fielder made in some World Series game. And he goes, what was it not unlike? And they're all looking at each other like, what? And the answer, like, he gives them the negative buzzer, and he basically says, I'm sorry, the answer was, it was not unlike Atlantis rising from the sea, the bones of its once mighty kings clothed new in flesh. Like, this ridiculous answer. And then the skit basically ends with them getting on his case and forcing him to try to throw a baseball, and which of course he can't do, and they all laugh at him and he leaves. But somewhere in there, I think it was one of the first questions, he asks what the relationship between the outfield and the infield is like, philosophical terms, and the answer is that it is not, or he basically says it is akin to the relationship between being and becoming. I'm sorry, the answer is being and becoming. And it's like they're all looking at each other like, what is this show? So anyway, as silly as that is, that was in my mind because this episode is all about being and becoming. And by way of background, I've been studying lately for my comprehensive exam for my master's degree, and my master's degree in theology and Christian ministry, which I've been working on for a couple of years, while also working and being a new husband and new dad. And it's taken a while, but now as I'm going through and reviewing 4 or 5 years of comprehensive notes, and it's all stuff that I've internalized very deeply. It's fascinating to me, the material, because it's not just a subject matter for me. It's life. It's insight into divine revelation at a level I've never been able to experience yet before. That's why I went into this program, to try to go deeper into this, to more deeply understand and appreciate, hopefully, what the Lord has done for me, in a very sort of practical way, or a very sort of personal, maybe is a better word, way. That's why I did this program. And one of the courses is on eschatology, and it was one of my first courses and one of my favorites. And it's eschatology deals with it means the 4 last things. Eschaton means the end, or the final or outcome or uttermost. So eschatology is the sort of Christian discipline that studies the end things, death, judgment, heaven, and hell, and to better understand those. So along the way, I was studying for that course, there's this really awesome sort of thread that we followed at one point, going back to my notes, largely leaning on the writings of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, before he was Pope, Cardinal Ratzinger, who was one of the greatest theologians of modern times, in his own right, and then the Catholic philosopher Joseph Pieper. And I've talked about Joseph Pieper before, actually, in the leisure episode that I mentioned earlier, funny enough. So I want to dig in today a little bit to this idea of being and becoming, with just some insight from this course, and give you some suggested reading for after this if you want to go dig a little deeper, because it's something that I think we don't really talk about much or think about, but at the same time, like, its fingerprints are on literally every aspect of everything that ever happens to us in life. So I think it's worth considering for a few minutes. But before we do that, we want to go over here and check in with our field correspondent, Noelle, my 2-year-old daughter, who is always up to something and always fascinated with her surroundings. So she is our field correspondent for the Gracious Guest Show. Let's see what Noelle's up to these days. Check it out. Can you tell me all about your Play-Doh?
Make Davy Gap.
You're going to make Gampy's truck out of Play-Doh?
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with Gampy when you go in Gampy's truck? Where do you go?
Got it. And go
Okay. Do you take Annie to school?
Yeah.
What's that like? Tell me about taking Annie to school.
Play-Doh.
Really?
Play-Doh.
Whoa.
So-
Whoa. I got Play-Doh.
Yeah, Play-Doh, that's right.
When you
Wait.
go to Elmcroft, what do you do there?
Oh, that's a good question. I forgot. Yeah, what do you do at Elmcroft when you go there? You went there yesterday with Gampy. Remember what you did?
Have people.
You help people?
Yeah.
Do you like helping people?
Videos are gone.
Play-Doh's all gone?
Yeah.
You seem a little distracted this morning. Are your field correspondence duties making...
Mommy,
What's in your cup, sweetie?
What are you drinking this morning?
Eggnog.
Eggnog. Is it because it's the holidays? Okay. Can you say bye-bye? Can you say bye-bye? Say bye-bye. Say, I spilled my eggnog.
I'll be eggnog.
Say, whoops.
Whoops.
Okay, say bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That Noelle is always fun to talk to, and she's always so insightful, So anyways, let's get back into it here with this topic of being and becoming. And, what's interesting to me, I want to root this in, as I mentioned, Joseph Pieper's work. It's a tiny little book. It's from Ignatius Press. It's only, let's see here, like including notes, it's like basically 92 pages long, and it's a small book. It's small dimensions, but it is a treasure trove, and it's just fascinating how he goes through this topic and many others. And the book is, as the title indicates, on hope. Hope is the centerpiece of this, and he starts it off, though, his discussion of the Christian virtue of hope by talking about how mankind, how human beings are in a, what he describes in the Latin phrase, we are in a status viatoris. He says, this is on page 11, he says, to be a viator, V-I-A-T-O-R, means one on the way. So the status viatoris, he's basically talking about how our entire human life, our whole lifespan, whether it's, a couple of weeks or months or 120 years, our whole lifespan with no break, no pause at all at any point, is constantly a reality of being on the way to somewhere else. That we are simultaneously, we be or we exist, we have a sort of a fixed reality. Not the biggest fan of Descartes, but like I don't agree with the I think therefore I am. There's a lot more to it, because he basically makes subjective human experience the sort of still point of all reality, and that's way too far. However, I exist. I am. I'm sitting right here. I'm recording this. I have a name. I'm actually, this is my birthday, actually. So I have a birthday. I have facts about myself I can point to. I know where I went to high school. I know some of the things that I like. I know some of the things I don't like. I have a certain hair color. I have a certain eye color. But even with that, right, my eye color, my hair color, that's been pretty much constant my whole life. But it's gonna change. Hair color, at least. I don't know about eye color. Sometimes that changes a little bit. But my hair color, it's already changing. I have 3 white beard hairs that I named after students that I had a couple years ago. And I told them this because I said, guys, these weren't white before I started teaching you, so they got a good laugh at that. And then, they're fine. They were young. But anyways, even the things that we think of that are part of my fixed existence aren't really fixed. They might just be changing more slowly. Even with foods, right? Like, there's some foods that I love now that I practically have no memory of not loving them. But if I sit and I'm honest, there was actually a time when I hated some of those foods. So there was a change. So the human life is completely bound up with change, that we are always, as Pieper describes it, in the condition or state of being on the way, somewhere else, essentially. And he goes on here, where is it at? He describes, this is really cool. So he describes this status viatoris, this human condition, that conditions absolutely everything about our lives, absolutely everything, the big things and the small things. He describes it as the inherent not yet of the finite being. In other words, at every single point of your life, at every single point of your career, your relationships, your age, your interests, your education, whatever it is, sickness, health, every single aspect of your life is somewhere on the spectrum of not yet. It's somewhere past beginning, but somewhere before ending, all the time. That's pretty amazing when you think about it, because in a way, how is that? I mean, you see growth all around us in nature. This applies to all finite beings. But what's neat is like you think of like the waves at the seashore. That's a quick, easy image, right? Coming and going, and the wave crests and it breaks, and it crests and it breaks, and you see it right in front of your eyes. This principle of change, or the weather. So there's some things we see in us that are very quickly transitory, based on our sort of perspective. But then you look at things like mountain ranges, right? Or like a huge tall oak tree. Well, you know what? The exact same transition, the exact same transitory process of being and becoming and beginning and end is happening with those things too, but just much, much, much more slowly. Like that mountain is rising or falling before your very eyes, but you can't see it, just because of the timeline it's on versus the timeline you're on. But we are all in this status viatoris, and as humans in a special way, Pieper points to the importance of hope. That hope, as he describes it, is essentially the sort of quintessential human virtue. That it's in other words the virtue that is in a sense most appropriate to human beings. And I have this quote here. This is great. Before I mention that, he leads up to it with this little mention of being and becoming. He says, "God is He who is absolute being, in the fullness of whose being essence and existence are one. Whereas man is not ipso facto his own essence, his essence is in the process of becoming." So in other words, he's saying God is not... The word God means being itself with a capital B, being that does not come from or go to anywhere, being as such, being who does not draw his being from anywhere else. God is not contingent. Everything else is. Everything he makes is contingent because it starts with him. But he's the source. Sources don't have beginnings. Sources are the beginning. That's what it means. He goes on, he says, "This becomingness of the creature is especially evident in the concept of the status viatoris, in the not yet of man's being on the way. The whole span of the creature's becomingness, as he calls it, the whole span of the creature's becomingness is revealed as in a concave mirror between the shores of being and nothingness." That's kind of cool. And he really describes this a lot. And this is, the philosopher in him. You got to chew on it. This isn't some, bubblegum kind of book. You just read it and you're like, oh, that feels good. And you rub your tummy. This is one where you read it and you start to kind of rub your temples a little bit. But not because it's impossible or because it's meaningless. Precisely because it's so full of meaning. It's like cheesecake instead of, just a cupcake. I love cupcakes. They're great. Cheesecake is better. And it's denser. And you have to take your time with it a little bit more. So he finishes this. This is just the intro. I can't recommend this book enough. He says, the meaning of the creature's existence is not nothingness, but becoming, or that is fulfillment. He argues that the very nature, the very fact that we are always becoming something, for better or for worse, that's where our will comes in. He says the very fact of that is evidence that we are meant for fulfillment, this destination, and this, I always get really annoyed. Sorry if you've said this before, I'm not trying to pick on you. I get really annoyed. It's a pet peeve of mine when someone says, oh, it's all about the journey, not the destination, and I'm like, look, how many times, if ever, in your life has that ever been true about a journey? Ever, right? What do kids say when they're in the car? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Tell a 3-year-old that it's all about the journey and not the destination, or that 3-year-old's dad, okay? It's just not true. Now, yes, okay, sometimes, we plan things along the way on a trip or something, of course, and I love the journey a lot of times. I love going on a trip, but I don't love just the journeying part. I love the end result of having done all of those things. I love the end result. Not because I want to get through it all and just blow through it and I don't care about it. No, the whole point is to go through the journey, to have the experience, to get to the end and then be able to look back on it, and that's the journey is complete. That's the whole point. So the end is not the destination. Come on. I know what people mean by that, so I'm sorry, but I think we miss a huge piece when we just throw that quote out there. So Pieper, the whole point of all this is he builds up and he says the only answer that corresponds to man's actual existential situation is hope. In the virtue of hope, more than in any other, man understands and affirms that he is a creature and that he has been created by God. So in other words, it's the preeminent virtue of those of us who are in this not yet situation. The fact that we are always both beings who exist, but beings who by nature are becoming something we don't exist as yet, proves that we come from somewhere, something else, and we're on our way to that, to some end. We're not just a fixed reality that just poofs into existence randomly and then I have all of my being like I'm holding all of it in my arms close to me. And there it is. I am constantly, at every point of my life, receiving more and more of who and what I am from outside myself. From God, primarily. From the situations I run into. Self-actualization is true to an extent. Every single one of us is a great ought to be or might have been. That's all mixed together, right? Another way you can think of it is I think that we basically spend our whole lives somewhere between. My whole life is somewhere between the whats and the what ifs. The whats and the what ifs. That might be a cool way to think about it. If I ever write a book on this, that's what I'll call it. TM, right there. I just air quoted a trademark. So think about that a little bit today. I'm going to wrap this up here in a couple minutes, but when it comes to self-actualization and what we make of ourselves, I think you can only go so far with that. There's so much more. There's so much mystery, so much marvel, so much that comes from beyond my reach. Things that I can't grasp for myself when it comes to what I'm becoming. And that as I'm fulfilled, and I think if we're honest, we know this, those moments that you tend to look back on, it's ironic, how time works in all of this, that there's two kinds of time in the sort of Christian philosophy on this, and then the ancient philosophy, kind of that it's built on. There's two kinds of time. In the Greek, it's, there's chronos and kairos. Chronos, funny enough, is probably the one that we tend to think of the most, because when we talk about time, we talk about chronology, and we almost always are referring to chronos. We almost exclusively think of time in terms of chronos, and it's probably because that's the way we tend to experience it most directly, most obviously. Chronos is like sequential, numeric time. Chronos is what's happening when you're looking at your watch face and you're watching the seconds tick by. Chronos is also what's happening when you're sitting at the DMV or in the hospital in the waiting room or in the emergency room, tick, tick. In fact, as I'm sitting here recording this right now, there's a clock way on the other side of the room, and God help me, I can hear it ticking. It's just tick, tick, tick. Like, oh, God, that's chronos. Chronos is the time that drives you absolutely nuts sometimes, and you think it's never going to end, and it's going to last forever, okay? Kairos, on the other hand, Kairos is different. Kairos is time, basically eternal time, which seems like a strange statement, but if eternity is essentially, in the Christian sense, eternity is the perfect still point. It's been called the perfect still point of perfected or perfect beings. Time, when you talk about time standing still, that's chronos. I'm sorry, that's kairos, excuse me. That's kairos. Kairos is the time you feel when you're with that person you love and there's the perfect sunset and the waves are just right. And you end up, you're there for what seems like 30 seconds, and then you look at your watch and you're like, oh my gosh, an hour just flew by. That's that's kairos. Kairos is what time, sort of timeline you're in when you're holding your newborn baby. Kairos is what you're experiencing when you have that first kiss. Kairos is what's going on when they're at the retirement party and everyone that, some people even that you didn't like, turns out they liked you a whole lot and they give you this gift and they all just have glowing praise about you, and your heart is exploding with love and graciousness and gratefulness. That's Kairos. So what's ironic, though, is Kairos is basically a perfect experience of the present moment. It's fullness. Chronos is like our life stretched out over all these years, passing by one tick at a time, and sometimes it seems like it's never going to end. Ironically, though, when you look back on a Chronos experience, it's like vaporous and almost meaningless in the grand scheme of your life. Like you can't, it's hard to reconstitute how long it felt like it was going to be when it was going on. High school is a great example of this, I think. I mean, when I was in high school, guys, I thought it was never going to end. And now I look back on it, and it's hard to gather it up into any kind of, like, big... I mean, it was important, but it's hard to overstate its importance at all. It's hard to make it what it used to be in my mind. Whereas, ironically enough, Kairos are moments that pass by in a fleeting instant. They disappear before you can even see them. Sometimes they vanish without just in a moment. But when that one moment was going on, you can go back and remember that, and hold on to it and like embrace it. I mean, when my daughter was born, I held her for a few seconds. I can go back to that moment anytime I want, and I'm just content as can be, and I could reflect on it for hours if I wanted to, if I could, if I had that luxury. You just know the difference, So think about that a little bit today. That may be a cool exercise for you. What are the Kairos moments in your life? What are the Chronos moments? And are they even remotely comparable? No. Kairos is so powerful because Kairos is where we're headed. Kairos is heaven. Kairos is eternal, never-ending, perfect present, where your life and your meaning and all of that, and the life, and the meaning of all the people you ever loved, every desire, every good desire you've ever had, everything that was true to your nature, your true nature, all of it is gathered up and present at once forever. It's not spread out over endless, years. So, being and becoming, this great mystery that we all live through, between what I was and what I will become, this mysterious reality that my existence itself in this life is constantly on the way to somewhere else, that should cause us to reflect a little bit. Because it's not just where we're headed, it's to whom we're headed. He's the same one from whom we came. He loves you, and he wants you to have a whole lifetime of Kairos moments. So, maybe something to consider today. So thanks so much for tuning into the show today, the Gracious Guest podcast. Spread the word. This one's a little more esoteric today maybe than some of the other episodes. Sometimes it's a little more lighthearted and kind of goofy, but there's always wonder and marvel at the heart of all of it, because I want to appreciate and love life more, and sometimes that takes effort. And I want you all to be able to do the same. We can do this together, and thanks so much for tuning in. So shoot me an email if you want over at thegraciousguest@gmail.com. If you want to give me some feedback on the show, give me some ideas of movies or books or other Marvel and, not the brand, but Marvel, lowercase m, and sort of wonderful things to maybe check out. I will put in the show notes, as I mentioned, some of the books I referred to today, if you want to check those out, some other resources. So also go over to my website, thegraciousguest.org, for a lot of cool stuff. My blog's over there, some of my musings, and then also some presentations that I offer if you want to have me come to your parish or event to present. I'd be more than happy to do that. And that's pretty much going to wrap it up for today. So until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.